U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris is set to become the Democrats' presidential nominee, but who will she choose as her running mate? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Kamala Harris has earned the backing of enough state delegates to clinch the Democratic presidential nomination. Here's what she had to say on a campaign call on Friday.
We are going to win this election, and it is going to take all of us, whether it is making calls, connecting with our communities, engaging online, or even talking with people where we go every day.
Well, with about 2 weeks to go before the Democratic National Convention, who will Harris pick to solidify the presidential ticket? To discuss this and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us right here in the studio, Jacquie Luqman is coordinator for the Black Alliance for Peace DC. From New York, Rob Long is a contributing editor at National Review and a columnist with the Washington Examiner. Also in Washington, D.C., Douglas Sloan is principal at the National Capital Strategy Group, and Rina Shah is a political strategist and commentator, also right here with us in the studio. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. Douglas, let me start with you. Kamala Harris has all but sewn up the Democratic nomination. Just a few formalities to go through. Now the focus, of course, as I said, turns to who she will pick as her vice presidential running mate. There are some names being mentioned right now. The two names that are being mentioned, Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania and Tim Walz. There's also speculation about the Arizona Senator Mark Kelly. Where do you see this heading?
Well, Pennsylvania is a key swing state the Democrats are going to have to win in order to win in November. So I'm thinking that the campaign would be leaning toward Shapiro. However, there is a little pushback on Shapiro by some of the more progressive wings in the party, wing of the party, because of his stance on Israel. So there's some talk about, well, you know, let's maybe try to go with the candidate that's going to create the least amount of resistance and go with Governor Walz from Minnesota. However, Minnesota is a thoroughly blue state. So my bet in terms of being a strategy would be to go with Shapiro out of Pennsylvania.
Rob Long, great to have you with us. Welcome to the show. Always good to have a new voice. Let's talk about the role of a vice president here and choosing a vice presidential candidate. I mean, it certainly makes for good headlines. It certainly makes for lots of talk on television and discussion in the newspapers. But is it really that important? I mean, here's the view of Donald Trump, the Republican presidential candidate. Let's listen to him.
Historically, the vice president, in terms of the election, does not have any impact. I mean, virtually no impact.
So, I mean, listening to Donald Trump there, I mean, do you agree with what he has to say? I mean, Douglas Sloan said a moment ago, look, it's important because if you choose someone like Josh Shapiro, he does increase her chances of winning that key swing state of Pennsylvania.
Well, maybe. I mean, I think what Trump was saying was what everybody in his camp is telling him about his disastrous pick of J.D. Vance. So it almost sounds like he's trying to confirm for himself that it's not going to make any difference. But he's basically correct. In terms of winning a state, look, if Kamala Harris needs the governor of Pennsylvania to win Pennsylvania, she's got much bigger problems. What you want in a pick is you want to send a message to all of the states and all of the decision-making, the electorate that's still up for grabs, the addressable voter, the addressable market. And in that case, the governor of Pennsylvania is a perfectly fine choice, but she may make a more bold, more clear choice in Tim Walz from Minnesota, who is older and looks like a guy you see at Home Depot on the weekends. And he sends the message, I think, to those middle voters who are really going to put her in the White House or keep her out of the White House, that this is a balanced ticket in terms of politics. It's more centrist. It's more inclusive to the people that she needs to get to vote for her. So I would not be surprised if it was Tim Walz. I really wouldn't. I think it's either Shapiro or Walz, but I don't think she's going to lose Pennsylvania because she doesn't pick the governor of Pennsylvania. And I think she could win Pennsylvania by sending a message to Pennsylvania centrists that her administration's basically going to be, you know, what they're trying to sell, which is normal Americans as opposed to weird Americans, which is something they really successfully managed to convey the past 2 weeks.
All right, and Rob, I just want to get back to the Trump ticket and something you said there. You said the choice of J.D. Vance was a disastrous one for Trump. Could I just reverse that question and say, could someone like J.D. Vance actually result in Trump losing the election?
I don't think it'll be his fault, although I think that if Trump loses, that is certainly what Donald Trump is going to say, and he will say it until probably his last breath on earth. But I think more about it, it's more about the message it's sending about that ticket, that ticket is extremely conservative, probably more conservative than most Americans, that ticket is obsessed with racial identity and racial politics and racial purity, that is a ticket that seems to be a little bit very much out of step with Americans on abortion. It seems to be having a hard time finding its voice, finding its message. I think that the J.D. Vance choice was a symptom. I don't think it'll be a disease.
Okay, and all those issues you mentioned, we will be talking about on the show. Jackie, great to have you with us in the studio. And as I said, Kamala Harris will be the Democratic nominee. She's been chosen by the Democratic Party. But what do we know about her policy positions? I mean, there's a whole range of issues: the economy, immigration, trade, relations with China, the Gaza situation, Ukraine, and you know, we can go on, housing, student debt, etc. What do we know?
We know the same things that we knew in 2020, but with some additional information, and now having had her been the vice president for 4 years and supporting some very, very bad policies. The first thing I want to mention is that people dance around this issue of genocide in Gaza and just frame it as just generally, oh, his position on Israel, you know, their relationship with Israel. No, where do you stand on genocide? That's the question that people are not asking. And I understand why people aren't asking, because people in this country, they're thinking, we just want to elect a president. We can't think about that thing that's going on over there. But this is human rights and life and death. And that should not be something that we separate ourselves from because of politics. Genocide against one group of people affects us all. And that we're not talking about this in this election cycle is frightening.
Yeah, but that is Biden's position, isn't it? And she has, because of her position in the administration, had to operate in his shadow, hasn't she?
Well, she came out of the shadow at that first event when Netanyahu came and anti-genocide protesters did what they did, and I applaud them for releasing the mealworms and the maggots. I mean, how else do you welcome such a worm who is committing genocide? But what was her first statement? It was condemning the anti-genocide protesters for putting their lives and their bodies on the line to call attention to the fact that now she is not doing anything to stop a genocide. Yep. And so her statement was very clearly along the same lines of the Biden administration's position, of this government's position over the past 8 months now of this genocide. She stands solidly on the side of the apartheid state, the Zionist apartheid entity.
Do we know that, though?
Yes.
Yeah.
She has always supported Israel. Kamala Harris has received hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars from AIPAC.
Yeah.
She is a supporter of Israel. And for us, for black people who are always struggling against the degradation of this country and its government and its policies, it's appalling to me. And many of us black organizers, radical organizers, to see so many black people supporting genocidal policies. So we know Kamala Harris. We know her. We've chosen to forget her policies from 2020 that caused us not to support her then. And here we are.
Okay. Rina, good to have you in the studio as well. You know, ever since Biden announced that he was stepping down, and then we already had that, you know, a lot of excitement about Kamala Harris taking his place. It generated a lot of excitement. And we look at the polls, it's closed, hasn't it? I mean, she's closed the gap. She's also raised record sums of money. There's still the Democratic convention to go. That's probably going to generate even more excitement. Thing is, will it last? And where do you see this going? Given that the election will be decided by just a few states.
Yeah, so what about all these factors, right? How does this all add up to make sense for the Harris campaign? And I do think, when you look at her rollout, her becoming this presumptive nominee so quickly, I think the right has been a little bit scared by it because the energy is so infectious, it seems. And where the energy tends to be is with a lot of younger folks. But also I've met numerous people that are Gen X or millennials that also feel like finally we got Biden to drop and now we have a real chance at beating Trump. And so for those people who are supporting Harris, I do think not everybody is in lockstep with her policy positions, but I do think a number of people are out there, and this is probably underreported in American mainstream media, that many people see this as an opportunity to really defeat Trump and the longer term goal, which is defeating Trumpism. How do you really do that when it feels like the Republican Party has always lived to see another day despite many setbacks? This past 3 weeks has highlighted what I think are the deficiencies of Trump. Ever since he gave the nod to J.D. Vance, the senator from Ohio, I think his campaign's been completely capped, and the momentum for the campaign has been capped. The energy has been zapped. Not only a disastrous VP pick, you are seeing Trump kind of shoot himself in the foot every day. The things he says and does don't really square up with the Trump we got to know in those early days of 2016, or even the Trump that was in the White House, or even the one that left. He continues to litigate the 2020 election. We know that doesn't sit well with a lot of people. So to me, it was always a foregone conclusion that Kamala Harris was going to close the gap with Trump. And in some polling we do see her besting him, but not by much. And I do think this election will be close. I don't think she is the Democrats' best shot at defeating Trump, but I do think she's the best and only option at this point. They're not going to roll into this convention that starts on the 19th and do an open one. It's already set and squared away that she has all the wind in her sails. But how does that translate to more money coming in? Because I think the money that she got wasn't purely because of who she is. I think it was sitting out there waiting to be activated.
Douglas, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, once the Democratic convention is over, when things start settling down and people start asking those tough questions about where you stand on these issues that I mentioned a moment ago, once, as Rina said, the wind in her sails is no longer there, what happens then?
I don't know if that's going to be the case. When you say once the wind in her sails is no longer there, we are in August now. Obviously, the wind has not left her sails in the past week with $200 million raised and 170,000 new volunteers, and we're showing a separation of support for her with black voters, with young voters, and now everyone is talking about the VP pick. Who is she going to choose for the VP pick? So the Dems are doing a masterful job at kind of keeping her in the news and in on the tip of everyone's tongue. And you have to remember, we're going to go straight into the convention, and then we're in August, which is traditionally a kind of dead month for most people. Many people are on vacation. But then September, early voting starts. Some of those overseas ballots get sent out. They start voting in the second week of September. So for all intents and purposes, we are in the election in September. So we're really on a very condensed schedule here. And the time really works in her favor to just kind of keep this momentum going straight through the election and into November.
Right, Douglas, I'm going to talk about something that the media is talking a lot about, that Trump is talking a lot about, and that is Kamala Harris's race. Let's listen to some of what the former president had to say.
I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She has always
But
identified as a black woman.
I respect either
black
one.
College.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way.
So Douglas, what do you make of this focus on her race, on her ethnic background?
It's insanity. This is going back to the Trump playbook of trying to divide people and making very divisive statements. I don't know what his campaign was thinking, sending him in front of the National Association of Black Journalists, a bunch of educated journalists that know Kamala's background, that know all of Trump's dirty tricks from his playbook. Kamala is a woman from Oakland who grew up in Oakland, who attended one of the most, if not the most prestigious historical black universities in the country, and pledged the oldest black Greek letter sorority in the country. And then spent summers with her father in Jamaica. Mm-hmm. So she checks more black boxes than most people. And to have Trump, of all people, question her race is not doing anything but throwing his tractors.
Okay, Rob, what are your thoughts on this focus on race? I mean, does it work for or against Trump? I mean, he's brought it up several times. There was also an opinion piece in the New York Times last week, and this focused, and the writer in this piece was talking about her name and the fact that Trump always mispronounces her name. And his view, his theory, is that he does that on purpose. He does that deliberately because he wants to frame and portray Kamala Harris as someone who's different, not one of us.
Yeah, that piece was by John McWhorter, who's a really brilliant writer, and he's absolutely right. Look, you can look at it two ways. You can look at it as a test of your character, what your priorities are, right? And you look at it as pure politics. On the pure political level, it was insane. And I guarantee you that the cooler heads in his campaign were shouting at the TV to get him to shut up. He's incapable of doing that. So, when Trump speaks, we're hearing directly from his, reptile brain. And there's no filter here. But the second thing is, it's sort of it's this very strange argument to an America that is an incredibly mixed race, whose his running mate has children who are mixed race. His inability, or sort of disingenuous inability, to say mixed race is so strange. Yeah. But especially on the part about Black Americans, I mean, as Douglas said, Howard University is, one of the most famous Black universities in the country, maybe the world. And Kamala Harris was in AKA, and I have one of my best friends from college was in Alpha, and I guarantee you, she was watching that, she was throwing something at the screen too. It's, when you're the structural advantage that the challenger has in a race like this is you get to run against the incumbent and wrap their record around them and make them defend it. And Trump's got plenty of material if he wants it. I mean, it is true that there's an enormous inflation problem. It is true that unemployment went up in the past quarter. It is true that the economy is kind of giving people the jitters. We saw today the Dow tumbled 1,000 points. Trump has an argument. The challenger has an argument. His inability to make that argument and his insistence on, anybody who's put it this way, anybody who's convinced by that was already going to vote for Trump. And that is not the recipe to win an election.
Okay, Jacquie, I want to get to one of the other big issues in this election, women's reproductive rights. Harris would like to see those rights restored as a national priority. The Supreme Court, as we all know, decided that they would leave those rights to the state. And many rank-and-file Republicans in parts of the country would like to see abortion outlawed completely. How big an issue will this be?
Well, unfortunately, because the Democrats they chose not to protect Roe versus Wade back during the Obama administration, where he unequivocally said at this time, abortion is not a major issue for the Democratic Party. And then Ruth Bader Ginsburg did not step down when she was asked to. The recess appointments weren't made. And where we are with this Supreme Court that did what it did with reproductive rights. So when we talk about this issue of reproductive rights during this election season, during this campaign, I can't help but remember why this is still an issue. It's still an issue because and people will say, well, it's still an issue because the Republicans want to outlaw abortion. Well, that's 75 years, 50 years of the Republicans doing what they do all the time, and they tell you they're going to do it, so it's not a surprise. What was the surprise was the Democratic Party choosing not to defend women's reproductive rights and telling everyone, not a priority for us right now. So I would present to people who are using abortion rights as the campaign issue and the reason why people need to vote for Kamala Harris. I like to remind people why we're still having this conversation. Barack Obama and every Democrat that followed him did not protect abortion rights. So I don't see what she's going to do anything differently from what they didn't do.
Rina, Trump's position on abortion rights, it aligns more or less with the court. He wants states to have a greater say. And there's also some evidence to tell us that the position of Republicans on abortion rights did cost them dearly in the midterms. So how do you see this as an election issue?
Well, number one, I don't think Donald Trump can be trusted on what he says regarding abortion. You know, reproductive rights and access, it's just foreign to him. It's never been an issue that he's been able to talk about responsibly. He got his 3 justices on the Supreme Court of the United States. They did what we knew what they were going to do. Get that overturn of Roe versus Wade done. Now, could Democrats have codified Roe? Absolutely, and they missed an opportunity. But don't put that on Joe Biden entirely, right? We should look at the Democrats before, which I think Jacquie brought up, and we forget history. We're terrible students of history in this country when we just forget kind of who this all impacts. It's black and brown women who come from lower socioeconomic status. These women are rural too, not just urban. So you've got 58 million women of reproductive age in the United States. Are these women going to be galvanized by this issue entirely? I don't think so. I think American women are not a monolith. We're complex. And, you know, economy is front of mind, immigration's front of mind. That's being tied to public safety and crime by Republicans daily.
Right.
And then our handling of geopolitical tensions. I mean, I every day hear from another woman, not in my age demographic, saying, I just cannot believe the amount of money we send overseas. When look all around you, you see veterans sleeping on the streets. You know children are going hungry in the summertime. I mean, these are the issues that I worry about which leaders of ours are best equipped to talk about. So when I talk about abortion and Trump, I just say, don't trust him. He may tell you today that he's not going to put a national ban on abortion. You don't know who's going to be in his ear if he re-enters the White House. I think, again, this is an issue in which, again, it's been kicked back to the states. We've seen how disastrous that's been in Arizona, Florida, draconian bans. But when it ends up on the ballot, Republicans lose, and they know that. And that's why J.D. Vance is even a bigger liability than they thought. He's a terrible pick for the Republicans when it comes to abortion as well.
Douglas, I'm going to turn to some other issues now. Let's turn to foreign policy, you know, and how important it will be for Kamala Harris to separate herself from her current boss's policy, especially with those policies that Jacquie mentioned a moment ago in Gaza. I mean, this is a conflict that could play a decisive role in the way this election turns out because of voters in the Midwest, Muslim voters, who are very upset with the manner in which Biden has handled this.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember, and I think that this was brought up recently, that the vice president does not have a decisive role in what the president does for the most part. If the president makes the decision on, you know, what his policy going to be, you know, the vice president doesn't say, well, no, I disagree with that and we should go this way.
Yeah, but now that she is the candidate, will she have to come out and you know, articulate a new policy, a different policy? It's going to be difficult. She's still in the administration. She's still the vice president.
Yeah, so she definitely will have to walk a tightrope in that regard, but in so much so that she also will have the opportunity to an extent to run as a challenger because she has not or will not have to eat all of Joe Biden's policies or baggage in this election. So she can run as a challenger against Donald Trump and all of his failed policies during his term because, again, the vice president is not calling the ball on policy. So, yes, she has a great opportunity here to kind of reformulate her position on Israel and other issues along the border and controversies and so on and so forth, which could help in gender and work towards her favor with gaining new voters, gaining new support, gaining a much broader support than maybe Biden had because of these issues, because he's so tied to his initiatives regarding Israel and the border. So she really has, in my opinion, she has a great opportunity to kind of separate herself and find new support with a new policy. But yeah, she's definitely going to have to walk a tightrope in that regard because she still is vice president of the United States.
Rob, on this particular issue, is it fair to say that in the past, if we look at past elections and election campaigns, that foreign policy issues have not played a big role in the way people vote, but in this instance, that there could be a change?
Well, I think less. I think it'll be the same. In this instance, foreign policy, in terms of sort of policies and a posture, I think will remain sort of way down there on the list of priorities for the American voter. That's not to say that foreign crises wouldn't. So, we're looking at a very dangerous world right now. We're looking at a very dangerous thing happening in the Middle East. We're looking at maybe a strike from Iran today, tomorrow, the next day. When those things happen, it's not a question of the policy for the voter. It's a question of who they want at the helm. And that is an opportunity for Kamala Harris, definitely, but it's also a liability for her. So as somebody who by definition represents the administration that is in power. So I think it's going to be less about a policy and a set of policies and much more about a potential crisis where the voter will evaluate her ability to sort of handle that crisis and to preside over that crisis, whether she wants to or not. I mean, those are the things that hurt a president. Those are the things that hurt a candidate. It really isn't a policy question.
But I do think that there is room for American voters becoming more sophisticated on the issue of foreign policy. Because particularly with this situation in Gaza, people are learning about the policies that this government has toward Israel and that has allowed them to do the things they do to set up an apartheid system and use it against the Palestinian people. In the same way, people are looking at the policies that the U.S. government has toward the Congo, which is another site of great human suffering, mass displacement, millions of people, and Israel is implicated in that as well as other multinational corporate entities. People are asking what the U.S. Military is doing in all of these African countries. While at the same time, people in African countries are saying, why is AFRICOM still here? So Americans are becoming aware that foreign policy is an issue, and the crises that are happening are usually because of U.S. foreign policy.
Right. Rina, I've got 30 seconds very quickly. The likelihood of a debate between Trump and Kamala Harris.
I think it's very real that they do meet on a stage this fall, dependent on the date. Obviously Trump has said he wants to be with a friendly network. And I think he doesn't realize she still has the upper hand right now because he's skirting the issue. If you want to meet your enemy, just agree to the terms and be there.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.